written a lot of books, you've written a lot of articles, you've been involved in a lot of different research studies, but there's probably one that comes to mind that's quite key that I wondered if you would tell us about, which is the EPPSE Project.
The Effective Provision of Preschool Education Project, the EPPSE Project, started in 1997 and it's still continuing to, 2013. It's a longitudinal study of 3,000 plus children. We followed them right through the New Labour era, and we've basically been looking at the long-term impact of preschool on children. Different kinds of preschool, from private sector to the voluntary sector to the state-maintained sector, and the impact of preschool on children. We then looked at the impact of primary school, and now in fact the project is called the EPPSE Project, the Effective Preschool, Primary and Secondary Education Project, and we've looked at the contribution of preschool, primary school and now secondary school. So it's been running for about 14 years, and I guess there are three key findings from that study, and it interests us because most of the students who come to study with us are interested in these areas as institutions for learning: the home, the preschool and the primary school, and of course secondary school. And what we've been able to show is that what parents do with their children in their very early years, before the age of 5, you know, in terms of reading with their children or taking them to the library or singing songs and nursery rhymes, has a huge impact on children. So the quality of the home learning environment is very important. So we kind of have three main findings at the moment: that what the parents do at home is very powerful, and then what the preschool does is very powerful, and that the quality of the preschool, whether it's high quality, medium or low quality, has a long-term impact on children right up to the age of 11, 14, and that high quality is very, very important. And our third finding is the academic effectiveness of the primary school. If children go to a very good primary school, one with good results, or with medium quality results, or low results, what impact does that have on children? So those are the three key findings, but we have an interesting design for the research. It's an effectiveness design. So we not only look at what effects do home, preschool and primary school have on children, and now secondary, but how do they interact with each other for different groups. So if we have children who are disadvantaged, that is from home perhaps where mothers have low qualifications, or there's poverty in the home, or low social class, or if they're girl children or boy children, we look at that. But if they are disadvantaged children, what happens if they have a low quality home learning environment but go to a good preschool and then a good primary school, or they go to a very high quality preschool and then not a very good primary school? So we're able to look at some of the interactional effects for different groups of children.
What effects has your research had, do you think, on policy?
I think it's had a profound effect, but we also are responsive to the funding is from government departments often, not always, and we're responsive to changing policies, and if new things need to be looked at, for instance, the quality of the pedagogy, so we might know what's making a difference to children in terms of quality in preschools, but then we might want to know, what does that quality look like? What are the explanations for those statistical patterns? In terms of policy, for instance, at a government level, the study we talked about earlier, the EPPSE Project, we found that children who started preschool early benefited the most. And one of the government policies now is to give all disadvantaged 2-year-olds free preschool. And that's been a very, very important finding. There were initially some pilots of putting more disadvantaged children into preschools earlier to give them that slight catch up with
Yeah.
middle class children in terms of more advantaged children, shall we say, because not all middle class children do well, but to give them that catch up in a stimulating environment to benefit from starting school at age 5.
But another area that you have written a lot about and you've been involved in for since you started in academia is the area of equalities, and I wondered if you could tell me a little bit about your work there.
Yes, I mean, my very early research was focused on equalities at every level. I did look at racial equality in teacher education and looked at issues of gender, social class and race with very young children. And that was quite pioneering work in the early 90s, because not many people were thinking about those areas with children under 5, or in fact even accepted that children under 5 could hold such views or be influenced by those things. Nowadays we take it for granted that children are influenced by everything and that they're learning not just through our intentionality, but also vicariously. They're picking up information from parents and society. I think I've continued with that theme. I mean, in our longitudinal studies, the EPPSE study again, we have a huge focus on equalities, and we were called upon to feed into a government review called the Equalities Review, run by Trevor Phillips in the Cabinet Office, and we gave information about what influences children in terms of gender, ethnicity, social class. And it was quite interesting because it's a longitudinal study and we have data over many, many years for our children. We've been able to look at, for instance, how race, class and gender interact with each other. A couple of interesting findings. For instance, when we look at the demographics for our children and take into account social class and mother's education and so on, ethnicity has, the effects of ethnicity are almost ameliorated, because quite often certain ethnic groups fall more disproportionately into more other disadvantaged categories, such as lower education or low SES, or living in areas of high deprivation. And that's an interesting finding, I think. Why are those groups overrepresented?
You've talked a lot about your work in the UK, but I know you also are renowned abroad, that you are involved in some international studies. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about that?
Many of the academics at the Institute do work overseas. They're visiting professors in universities within the UK, but also work in other countries. I'm, for instance, conducting 2 longitudinal studies currently. I've had a large number in different countries in the UK, but 2 very overseas ones. I have a randomised controlled trial in Ireland, in Dublin, looking at basically evaluating the impact of a parent program and a high quality preschool program on children who have had it and children who haven't in a very disadvantaged area, looking at whether this intervention accelerates children's development. Another study is at the University of Melbourne, where I'm a visiting professor, and we have a 5-year study there called E4 Kids. It's all around effectiveness in early education for children 3+, from the age of 3 to 8. It's a 5-year study funded by the Australian Research Council and the governments of Victoria and Queensland, which are 2 very large states in Australia. But I think the work we're doing here on early childhood education and primary education is cutting edge. And certainly when our students come here, they get an experience with colleagues who are conducting research not just in their own country but other countries, and having a huge impact with the work that they're doing.
The last question I'd like to ask, actually, as a student, what are the sort of dispositions, what are the skills and abilities necessary to be a successful researcher?
You know, the things you do all the time that become assimilated and accommodated, like opening doors, you never think about them. That's a hard question, but I'll try and answer it and give it some thought, because clearly we do know how to do research well, otherwise we wouldn't get funded millions of pounds to do it. I think that the process is probably best explained through the kind of relationship we've had as research student and researcher. Many of the students that come to us, Denise, are just like yourself. They're highly accomplished, mature professionals. They've come from university departments or from local authorities working with staff, and they have a great deal of pragmatic, day-to-day, evidence-based experience. And I think that one of the things that I'm a great believer in is that when you work with people, whether they're students, and in particular if they're students, but also in teams of researchers, the apprenticeship approach is really important, that you model for people what a good researcher does. I know that some of my students get a little frustrated when I get them to spend a lot of time reading, because in a way your study is only as good as your research questions are, and only as good as your research design is. So issues around being well informed about the topic that you're going to investigate, only when you're well informed and standing on the shoulders of giants who have studied an area can you carve out your own niche and identify a problematic or a research question or a series of research questions which can be explored to make your own original contribution as a research student. Okay, Denise, thank you very much. Those were really difficult questions, some of them, but I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I've learnt a lot.